But Simone de Beauvoir, the French philosopher, much better philosopher than Jean-Paul Sartre, her partner, she said that becoming an atheist was like the world going silent. And I realized that for me, suddenly being cut off from the internet, even by my own choice, was like the world going silent. I had been trained for so long to become accustomed to the thin, insistent signals of the web. And suddenly they were gone. And that initially felt like a relief, and then felt like everything, like I wasn't getting any signals from the world. Mark Maron, the comedian, said that every Facebook status update could be boiled down to the underlying sentiment, will someone somewhere please acknowledge I exist? And that may be a bit hyperbolic, but there's no ordinary social interaction involves people flooding you with hearts, right? I realized that I had created a vacuum where all these signals that I had become accustomed to for years were. And so I thought, well, you have to fill that vacuum. And I started to think a lot about a science I'd actually learned about years before. And when I left Provincetown, I went and interviewed the man who pioneered this science, an incredible man named Professor Mahali Csikszentmihalyi. I think I did the last interview. Yeah, if I did, because sadly he died a few months ago, and I can't find any other interviews he did, although it could be, there might have been one that I can't find. And Professor Csikszentmihalyi, and you have no idea how long it took me to learn how to say that, how to pronounce that, was the pioneer of a science that many of you will have heard of called flow states, which are really important for us to think about attention. And a flow state, everyone watching will have experienced one. A flow state is when you're doing something that is deeply meaningful to you. It could be, playing the guitar, climbing a rock. For me, it would be writing, definitely not climbing a rock. I would fall off and die. Whatever it might be, it's when you're doing something that's deeply meaningful to you, and you get into the zone and you're just in it, and time seems to fall away, your ego seems to fall away, and your attention flows like a gusher. It's not effort. It's not like memorizing facts for an exam, or maybe some people get flow for that, but not many. It's just this effort. It's the deepest form of attention humans can provide. And it's the most effortless. So I wanted to explore with Professor Csikszentmihalyi, how can we build more of that into our lives, right? If this is such a deep form of attention, a gusher of attention, where do we drill to get that attention? And Professor Csikszentmihalyi had, sorry, I keep saying that because it took me so long. He discovered, I'll call him Mahali. He had discovered many things about flow states. But I think there are three that are particularly important for the purpose of the discussion we're having. Three things that can maximize your chances. There's never a guarantee, but can maximize your chances of getting into a flow state. The first is you have to do one thing at a time. Just one thing, right? If you're trying to do 2, 3, 4, 5 things, you will not get into flow. If you're interrupted, it kills flow. Secondly, he said that you have to choose a goal that is meaningful to you. Right? So your goal might be to learn to play the guitar, but if I tried to do that, it would sound like a cat was being killed. I can't do that. I wouldn't get flow. So it has to be something that's meaningful to you. And thirdly, it will hugely help if you choose something that's at the edge of your abilities, something that's just at the edge of your comfort zone. So let's say you're a medium talent rock climber. If you just clamber over your garden wall, well, that's not going to get you into flow. Equally, if you suddenly try to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, that's not going to get you into flow either. You want to find a rock face that is slightly higher and harder than the last rock face that you climbed. And so you want to do these three things. Choose one goal and filter out everything else. Just cut out all the other things you're trying to do. You want to choose a meaningful goal, and you want to choose a goal that's at the edge of your abilities. I started to do that in Provincetown. I started to do a different kind of writing. I was trying to write fiction. It's probably rubbish. I've got to go back and look at it. But that really got me into flow. And I found that when I was in flow, so much else followed. Another big change that happened to me in Provincetown was that I wasn't constantly switching between tasks. I was doing one thing at a time. And later, across the water over in Cambridge in Massachusetts, I learned why that's so important. I went to interview a man I mentioned before named Professor Earl Miller, who's one of the leading neuroscientists in the world. And he said to me, look, you've got to understand one thing about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limitation of the human brain. The human brain has not changed significantly in 40,000 years. It ain't going to change on any time scale. You or me are going to see you can only think about one thing at once. Sorry, but we've fallen for a mass delusion, which is that we believe we can think about many things. In fact, the average teenager believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time. But what Professor Miller's colleagues find when they get people into labs and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time, is actually you can't do more than one thing at a time. What you do is you very rapidly juggle between the tasks. You focus, you refocus, you refocus, you refocus. And it turns out that comes with a series of really big costs. If you are rapidly switching between tasks, something called the switch cost effect comes in. This is a very well-proven phenomenon. It's in lots of psychology textbooks. And basically, if you're trying to do more than one thing at a time, you will do all the things you're trying to do much less competently. You'll make more mistakes. You'll remember less of what you do. You'll be less creative about what you're doing. It just degrades your ability to do anything by a quite significant amount. There's loads of research on this, but there's one small study where when I read it, I thought, oh, it fell into place for me. Hewlett Packard, the printer company, called in a scientist. It was a really small study, which had similar findings to many bigger studies, like ones by Professor Larry Rosen and so on. So what the scientist did is he split a group of workers into 2. One group was told, basically, just do whatever your task is, you're not going to be interrupted. And the second group was heavily interrupted with, I think it was emails and phone calls. And then at the end of it, the scientists measured the IQ of both groups. And the group that had been, heavily interrupted, as so many of us are all the time, scored on average 10 IQ points worse than the group that was not interrupted. Now, to give you a sense of comparison, if you or me smoked a fat spliff together now and got stoned, our IQs would go down by 5 points. So at least in the short term, and there's obviously debate about the longer term effects of cannabis, in the short term, you'll be better off sitting at your desk, getting stoned and doing one thing at a time, than sitting at your desk, not smoking any weed and being constantly interrupted. But we're all being so deeply interrupted so much of the time. Professor Michael Posner at the University of Oregon found that if you're interrupted, it takes you on average 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus that you had before you were interrupted. But loads of people never get 23 minutes free, never get that. So we're constantly operating at this diminished level of brain power. And what I realized in Provincetown, when I went to interview Professor Miller, I suddenly thought about Provincetown. I thought, oh, for the first time in my adult life, since the internet was invented, not the first time, but the first sustained long period of time, I was just doing one thing at a time. It was like, instead of being blasted with a fire hose of water, I was sipping water, right? I was doing one thing at a time. I was also just hugely slowed down. Everything was slowed down as a result of that. And I later interviewed a guy called Professor Guy Claxton here in Britain at the University of Winchester. Fantastic person. I really recommend people read his book about the body. He's a really amazing thinker. And Professor Claxton did this research that showed that every practice that he looked at lots of practices that involve slowing down, like yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, a whole big loads of martial arts that I can never remember the name of, a big range that are just about slowing down. All of those practices improve your attention, and they don't just improve your attention while you're doing them. Obviously, while you're doing them, you're paying better attention, but your attention is better for the rest of, or for significant parts of the rest of the day. It seems to be that slowing down resets something inside you. So I felt all these experiences that were so great, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm never going to go back to how I was living before. Never going to go back to it. And I went back to Boston. I remember the day I got really sick on the ferry on the way back. It was very choppy. I was getting my phone back, and even like the Apple font looking really unfamiliar and weird. I think, God, what did I want this for? And within a few months, my attention was almost as bad as it had ever been. And I understood why later, when I went to interview Dr. James Williams, extraordinary person who had been a Google strategist for years at the heart of the Silicon Valley machine, who then quit in disgust at what they were doing to people's attention and has become arguably the world's most important philosopher. I interviewed him in Moscow because his wife works for the World Health Organization, so he was based there. And Dr. Williams said to me, well, the mistake you've made, Johann, by thinking the solution is just for you personally to abandon your devices, is a bit like thinking the solution to air pollution is just to wear a gas mask. Wearing a gas mask is a good thing. If I lived in Beijing, I'd do it, but it doesn't solve the problem of air pollution. You're seeking individual relief from a collective, systemic, social problem. And the solution ultimately has to be to solve that problem. And I started to explore this with all of the 12 factors that are degrading our attention and focus that I write about in Stolen Focus. I realized for almost all of them, not quite all, there's two levels at which we need to act. We need to individually protect ourselves and our children from these invasive devices on a personal level as much as we can. I mentioned before pre-commitment. You can't see this from the angle we're at, but my phone, I think I did before, I can't actually see from here, but I think I put it earlier. Yeah, I did. In the corner of the room, there's a plastic safe called a K-safe. They should be paying me commission because I keep plugging it everywhere. Very simple device. You take off, it's a little plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put your phone in, you put the lid on, and there's a dial at the top. It will lock your phone away for anything between 5 minutes and a week. Great, right? I do that 4 hours a day. I would not have written this book if I did not have that device. On my laptop, I have something called Freedom, which is, a lot of you will know, is an app that can cut you off, will cut your laptop off from the internet for however long you tell it to, or you can cut you off from specific websites, like, I don't know, Twitter, whatever it might be for you. There's dozens of things like that. I'm passionately in favor of these individual steps that we can take to protect ourselves and our children. The last quarter of the book is particularly about children. But we've got to be honest. Those things, many people can't do them at the moment. I'll come to why. But also, those things will get us some of the way there. They are well worth doing. They are really important, but they won't solve the problem for most of us, because this is a deep systemic problem. And I feel sometimes at the moment that it's like someone is pouring itching powder on us all day. And then that person is leaning forward and saying, do you know what, mate? You might want to learn how to meditate. Then you wouldn't scratch so much. And you want to go, well, okay, but you need to stop pouring itching powder on me. There are deep systemic forces that are invading our attention. And obviously, a lot of people think about tech in relation to this debate. It is not the technology itself. It's not the existence of the phone. It's not the existence of the laptop that are doing this to us. The apps, the sites that many of us are using are specifically designed to hack our attention. That's not my view. That's the view. That's what they say. Sean Parker, one of the biggest initial investors in Facebook, said we designed Facebook to maximally invade people's attention. We knew what we were doing and we did it anyway. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. That's what he said. I think the first bit, I might have slightly got the wording wrong. It's the exact wording is in the book. These apps are designed to maximally invade our attention. They use all sorts of techniques, like the rewards that I so craved and missed when I was in Provincetown, and many, many more that I go through in the book, to invade us. But there are many other, and I talk a lot in the book about how we can protect ourselves at an individual level from this, but also how we can take that on. I met people who were at the heart of the Silicon Valley machine who explained to me how we can stop this technology doing this to us with targeted regulation. We've got to go to the heart of their business model. Ask me about that more if you want. But I want to talk about another factor that I'm thinking about a lot right now, because I'm thinking about when I spoke to the How To Academy 4 years ago, and we were in the Conway Hall, and it was this big, thousands of people there. I know the capacity of the Conway Hall is, I might be getting that wrong, but at least many hundreds of people. And I'm thinking about this, where I'm staring at a little green dot. And I'm thinking about COVID, and I want to talk about one of the reasons why people have found it so hard to focus under COVID that I learned about in the research for the book. So I remember at the start of the pandemic, loads of my friends, loads of people, I'm sure you all had friends who said this as well. So there were some people saying things like, oh, we're going to be locked at home a lot. because all these heroic healthcare workers and some people are carrying on, but we're going to be locked away. Oh, I'm going to read War and Peace. I'm going to learn French on Duolingo. People started articulating all these things. Like, oh, finally, we're going to have space. And I don't know anyone who read War and Peace during COVID, and I don't know anyone who learned French. In fact, the Googling of phrases like, how do I get my brain to work, went up by 300%. People really have struggled with attention and focus under COVID. I've lost count of how many people have talked to me about this. Sorry, I've had a very dry mouth today. And when I was trying to understand that, I thought back to one of the people I got to know in the research for the book, one of the most heroic people. I mean, one of the three, I met so many great people working on this book. I think probably one of the three most heroic people I got to know for the book, and one of the most amazing people I've ever got to know. Her name is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She subsequently, after I got to know her, became the Surgeon General of California, so the equivalent of Chris Whitty for California. And she did a lot of research on a particular factor that harms attention. I remember her explaining it to me this way. She said to me, imagine one day you were attacked by a bear. You're walking down the street, a bear attacks you out of the blue, and you survive. In the weeks and months that follow, something totally involuntary will happen to your attention. A big part of your attention will shift from whatever's in front of you to scanning the horizon for danger and risk, right? Because you have been attacked out of the blue. You didn't see it coming. So you're looking for, well, what else might come out of the blue to attack me? You become more vigilant. Okay, now imagine that you're attacked a second time by a bear. Then you're very likely to get into a mode called hypervigilance. I think about people I've known who covered war zones, for example, who could become hypervigilant. Marie Colvin, who sadly died in Syria, she was hypervigilant. Hypervigilance is when a huge amount of your attention flips towards scanning. Where's the danger? Where's the risk? Where's the danger? Because you've been subjected to such unpredictable danger up to then. And I remember Dr. John Giardini. Sorry about that. I remember Dr. John Giardini, who's an amazing child psychologist in Adelaide in Australia, psychiatrist, said to me, deep focus, something like reading a book, is a really good strategy when you're safe, right? Read a book, you'll grow, you'll know more, you'll learn. But deep focus is a really dumb strategy if you're in danger. If you're in danger, you'd be a fool to sit at the Battle of the Somme and read a novel, right? You're going to get shot in the head. And I think, and there's lots of evidence that more ordinary forms of stress profoundly degrade attention and focus. So think about COVID, right? We got attacked by a bear, and then the bear came back, and now the bear's come back a third time with Omicron. And I think it's a degree to which we've developed this vigilance. It's partly vigilance to the risk about the virus itself, which is so hard to calibrate. It's partly vigilance about the risk to our way of life. What's going to happen next week? Where are we? Who are we? What's going on here? And I think this is really important because, firstly, if you've struggled to focus and pay attention in a global pandemic, do not blame yourself. That is a purely normal, natural thing to do. But it also shows us something really important for as we emerge from the pandemic. And so much of my book, Stolen Focus, is about how we solve these problems. And why I feel really heartened is I went to lots of places that had begun these solutions. And a lot of the solutions are, not all, there's many different aspects. We could talk about tech, ask me about lots of them, but many of them are about reducing stress. And I interviewed lots of people who'd shown that reducing stress in all sorts of ways reduces attention problems. Think about something as basic as financial insecurity. In Finland, they pioneered a small program that gave everyone in the program a secure guaranteed income. It wasn't very much. It was like £600 a month, I think. But just giving people a baseline of financial security. And one of the things Olavi Kangas, Professor Olavi Kangas, who, he might be a doctor, who studied and did the academic research on this, found was that people's attention significantly improved. Being stressed ruins your attention. Anything that reduces stress improves attention. So another big collective change for a place that I went to that had achieved this was I went to New Zealand, and I'm just going to check the time because they don't want me to talk too long. I went to New Zealand and went to a company called Perpetual Guardian, where the boss, Andrew Barnes, great guy, had noticed that his workers were just really stressed out and exhausted. And he decided to try an experiment. He moved his entire company, as 240 people, to a 4-day week. So he paid his workers the same as for 5 days, but they only had to work for 4 days. His head of HR literally fell over when he proposed this. And he said, well, let's see what happens. And I interviewed everyone who worked in their office in a place called Rotorua to see what the effect was there. The company was also studied by Dr. Helen Delaney at the University of Auckland and other academics. And it was fascinating because the people there explained to me that they got time to just switch off. They started sleeping more. They started relaxing more. And what was incredible was the company achieved as much in 4 days as they had in 5. And in a way, when I first learned that, it seemed almost too good to be true. But then I interviewed in Stanford in California, Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer, who's an expert on organizational management. And he said to me, look, it's not hard to understand. Ask any sports fan, do you want your team to go onto the pitch absolutely exhausted, worn out, knackered? Or do you want them to go onto the pitch well rested, having had a good sleep, up for the game? Of course, well-rested people focus better, they perform better. I think if we're going to get our attention back, we have to shift our consciousness. We have to stop blaming ourselves. This is not a failure of your part or my part. This is not a failure of willpower. It's not that your child is just weak or there's something broken about your child. We need to fight back against these forces that are doing this to us. We are not medieval peasants at the court of King Zuckerberg, begging for little crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds, and we can take them back if we want to. And this is particularly important right now, because we are facing a crisis that will require our collective attention like never before.